shall take the guys through this one.
All right, recording is on.
Okay, everybody, welcome to the second installment for Leadership at Diploma of Management students. In this session, this is part 2. In this section, we're actually just going to take you through one of the learning activities, which is developing career pathways. So by the end of this session, you'll have all of the information that you need to be able to go through and successfully answer those learning activities or the questions relating to the learning activity of developing career pathways. I will be just clearing up. I have had a few questions from students in relation to the last one, evaluate performance and recruitment. Instead of presenting that tonight, I'm going to just add that as an add-on video later on this week. So keep an eye out for part 3, which will be evaluate performance and recruitment. Just going to clarify a couple of questions students have had in relation to that before we present that one. So tonight, it's just on developing career pathways. 4 questions. So we shall take you through those 4 questions. Are you all ready? Alyssa, are you in the house tonight?
Yep, I'm ready to go.
Okay, sounds good.
Forward to these 4 questions.
Yeah, I think so too. So let's just talk, I guess, following on from last week. This subject's called leadership. It's the unit of competence that it relates to is actually manage people performance. And what were we talking about last week? So what we were actually talking about last week was, I guess, how to bring, some strategies you might use to support a new employee, for example. We talked a lot about onboarding. So what we talked about there was just the process that organisations go through when they bring a new member into the fold. So we talked about the probationary period. We talked about the importance of having an induction program and things like that. We talked about some statistics in reference to why we have onboarding programs. Talked about the importance of a probationary period, some of the documentation that an employer might see on their first day, and a few things like that. So we just talked about why, I guess, bringing somebody into an organisation. We also started talking then about the next set of questions we started talking about was, I guess, talking about coaching and training in general. You may remember we talked about the GROW model, a little 4-step model, talking about coaching and mentoring. And yeah, we just talked about different ways that you can document in sort of feedback, and we also talked a little bit about informal feedback, so just coaching and mentoring and feedback in general. So this, I guess, this leads on exactly from where we've left off there. So there's a lot about a performance appraisal. What's the actual first question we've got in this section, Melissa?
That very first question is, describe how you would conduct a performance appraisal and explain your methods and the outcomes you would aim to achieve. So that's that very first question, yep, for this particular unit.
Yeah, so I guess it does travel on nicely from where we left off last week. And a performance appraisal. Now, really, this is what we're going to be spending most of our energy talking about tonight. A performance appraisal is a formal. We talked last week about informal approaches. This is a far more formal approach. This is a very formal approach of effectively providing feedback to one of your staff members on their performance. It's an appraisal of their performance. So the word, what does the word appraisal mean, Alyssa? How would you describe that word?
I think when you look at something, when you appraise something, you are you're giving value to it. You're showcasing what your potential is. You're assessing, your performance or your value in the company. That's what I believe an appraisal would basically be. And just also, appraisals in organisations are, I think, an extremely important and valuable tool in helping manage performance, and they should really be a part of the culture of all organisations. And for those of you listening out there as well, if you feel like you haven't had a performance appraisal in a while, I always encourage people to ask for one, because I think it gives you some really valuable feedback and information on how you perform. So they are definitely a valuable tool when it comes to managing people performance.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you mentioned there it's like an evaluation really of performance, which is the way that I see it. But it is the formal version. So what we're actually talking about is a situation where a manager may sit down with their staff and just go through some of the, I guess, the standards that are expected and required in that role, key performance indicators and areas, and also just have a chat about how they are. Look, I always see a performance appraisal as a great opportunity for a staff member to tell their boss or to tell their superior or supervisor what it is that they're looking for to improve their working environment, and what it is that they're looking for in terms of a long-term, I guess a long-term objective or goal in the business. So it's a great opportunity to say, look, this is really what I'm trying to do. I'd really like to become a team leader. I'd like to get a little bit more responsibility. I'd like to work on some of the project teams. I'd love to do some coaching, some mentoring. I'd love to do this is really the best opportunity to state where you are, where you would like to see yourself, and it's also an opportunity for supervisors and managers to effectively start to develop a bit of a plan of attack for that person to be able to achieve their goals too. That's really the sort of time to do that. But it is your formal kind of feedback session, where typically this is what I've experienced before in a job appraisal. Usually what happens is that there's a degree of work that happens before it, and when I mean work, not a lot of work, but what's usually been asked of me by my superiors or my managers has been, look, Adam, I'd like you to please fill in this self-assessment on your own performance, and they'll give you the areas that they want to talk to you about in that meeting. So look, firstly you get a bit of a chance to have a bit of time to know exactly what's going to be discussed, but you get to evaluate and consider your own performance. And usually what will happen is that your manager will ask you to bring that document along with you to the actual meeting itself. And it gives you a chance to compare notes, if you like. Usually the manager or supervisor will also do the same. They'll put an evaluation and you'll have a look and see where you think you are in each other's eyes, so to speak. And it's a really good opportunity to be really open about your own performance and your own expectations and maybe what's been happening. So I guess that's a bit of a background on performance appraisals. The question here is asking, describe how you actually conduct a sort of two parts. So describe how you would conduct a performance appraisal. So we want to know what the steps are involved. So give us what those sort of steps are. Now remember, this is a formal approach. So there's a level of formality that we expect you to put in this answer. So, just walking over to the water cooler and having a chat is not the level of formality that we're looking for. So we want to see your organisational skills when you're answering this question. We want to see how well organised you are for that session, what are you doing, and so forth. And the second part we're asking, what are your methods? So when we say methods, I'm interested at this point, I'm interested to know any way that you're going to do it. So how are you going to run the session? That could be from the clothes you're wearing to where you're going to sit, to the room that you're going to be doing it, to the time of day that you choose to do it in, the time of week that you might choose to do it in, and also the outcomes that you want to achieve. So it's always good to go in with an idea of what you'd like to achieve by the end of it. Now what could be some things what could be some outcomes, Alyssa, that the guys might put as their answers here, or really what are some of the outcomes that you may want to achieve when you're running a performance appraisal?
Oh, look, I think a lot of the outcomes should definitely be focused around directing and forming goals to increase the performance levels of the person that you're chatting with. Performance appraisal is a very formal process, and the outcome would hopefully be to address any performance gaps and find ways in how to address them, and work with the employee on ways in terms of having a nice plan there in place. You not just I think that is generally the outcome, and I think the outcome should also be that there is an understanding and there's a mutual understanding of the direction and the value that the employee holds has in the organisation, and showcasing that. So really, outcomes, having a good strong developmental plan to move or to address the performance gaps that you've addressed is one outcome, but just also to ensure that your relationship to the employee is shown, and their value in the organisation is also addressed.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. I like that. Look, I mean, it can be those sort of intangible ones where your outcomes might be that you really want to motivate your staff, and so part of what your outcomes might be at the end is that you get an increase in energy and motivation from your staff member, and if that's what you're trying to achieve, then that's fantastic. That's great. Going back to methods. So for methods, we want to know various things. So your approaches, how you're going to be talking to them. You know, what your body language might be doing, where, how, why. You know, we talk about this is a formal feedback session. At the same time as being a formal feedback session, it's kind of important to keep it relaxed. It's finding the balance is really important with these appraisals. It's a really good test of your rapport with whoever you're running it with, for example. So if I'm running a performance appraisal with one of my staff members and we don't get along that well, it's going to be tested in this particular environment because, yes, it's a formal feedback session, but really to engage and to be able to have somebody really open themselves up and tell you how they're really feeling and what their real desires and wants and needs and expectations are, you've got to have a degree of trust. And we talked about that recently. You have to have trust, which means you need to be able to have a bit of rapport with somebody. So it's going to be difficult if you don't have great rapport to be really relaxed. But trying to find the balance between being relaxed and yet keeping it, I guess, business-like is really, really important. And you know, so some of the methods, I guess, what sort of methods are you looking for there, Alyssa? How would you sort of describe that?
I guess, in terms of methods, are we talking about delivery methods, or are we in terms of how we deliver that information?
I'm happy with it with either or. So yeah, how you deliver it, you know, so the method might be, this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to introduce, I'm going to talk to them about their history, I'm going to talk to them about expectations, I'm going to talk about the gap, I'm going to ask questions, and then you can tell us the format, if you like, or the agenda of your meeting. Yeah. So I'm more interested in the intrinsic things. So what sort of environment are you trying to create for that in that meeting? You know, when I was sort of learning about this many moons ago, one thing that I remember that stuck out for me was, well, two things actually. And if the guys put this down, I'll be very happy. Turn your mobile phone off if you're running one of these feedback sessions or performance appraisals. You know, you really want to make sure that you're giving your attention to the other person in these particular sessions. And can you imagine what it's like when you work really hard for a company, you get an opportunity. These opportunities only come around usually once a year in companies. And you get an opportunity to sit down and tell your boss and your manager what it is you're looking for, and hopefully that you can come to some sort of agreement. And every 5 minutes their mobile phone rings and they're looking down at their phone and answering SMSs, and it is probably one of the worst things you could do. Possibly one of the worst things you could do. Also, you know, make sure that you're avoiding interruptions. Leave the computer away. You know, close your door, lock your door. Tell other people that may be coming up to you regularly and asking questions, I'm not going to be available to speak to you between 12 and 1 today. I've got a meeting. I'm running my performance appraisals. Whatever it might be, these are part of the methods, because this tells us you understand how you're going to go about it, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and and as Saffron says, encourage the employee to do most of the talking. I think that in terms of delivering information, you want to really stay away from kind of making personal references or using language that isn't really appropriate, or just constantly talking. The great thing about a performance appraisal is that the environment you create and the methods you use should ensure that there is complete trust and complete rapport during that hour or that 2 hours, the valuable 2 hours that you have when you're conducting or you're involved in a performance appraisal. So I think it's really important to make sure that you hear what your team member has to say, and if your team member also and this is, I guess, where you've got to be quite open, and the pros of having something like a self-assessment done previously that you've brought to the meeting means that you've kind of you've got yourself in a situation where you know your value already and you can prove your value. So, as a person delivering a performance appraisal, I think you have to be quite open to feedback and really listening to where the employee sees themselves, because sometimes you're not always there with the employee. So maybe you need to give them the opportunity to tell you how they position themselves or how they should be ranked, because sometimes you're not always there, so you don't see every single thing that they might do on the job. So I think you've got to be quite open in terms of your method and have good, strong listening skills as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Saffron, you're 100% correct. You really have to make sure that you give as much opportunity for your employee to speak and encourage them to talk and encourage them to feel comfortable as well, which is again what I was talking about before about making sure you've got enough rapport with that student so that you can create that relaxed atmosphere so that you can elicit some nice discussion and some real responses.
Yeah. You have to assume as well. I mean, I think you don't want to have a performance appraisal already documented, so that you're looking like to assume that you haven't actually heard what the employee or the person's actually said. I think it's really important that you value the opinion and the information and the feedback that you do get from that team member. So listening to what they've got to say is really important.
Great. So these are all really good things that we'd like to see you put in with your answers. Anything else?
I would also just be quite cautious of, I guess, how you present your information as well. So just obviously when it comes to things like compliance, maintaining a person's privacy, so anything that gets discussed should remain confidential. Just making sure that you address the team member in a fair, honest way. There's no discrimination or any of those terminologies that might use to suggest that. So, obviously those are basic things, but they would be really important to also make sure you do when you're conducting your performance appraisal.
Now, look, sometimes in these performance appraisals, we or whoever's conducting the appraisal have to take a bit of a hard line. There's sometimes we have to sort of share stuff that isn't pretty, potentially. Now, depending on the bit of feedback, because, sometimes certain feedback needs to be dealt with immediately, and some other feedback is, going to be a situation where these formal occasions are the more appropriate times. You wouldn't just walk past the water cooler and say certain things, but you might, find that this is the right opportunity to talk about it. And it might be that, once every couple of weeks, the person's late to work by 10 minutes, doesn't say anything, and just slips in and starts doing their work. And this is probably the opportunity that you might find to talk about their punctuality or whatever it might be. So, just out of interest, I mean, have you got any methods or thought processes in terms of providing feedback to others? Because providing feedback is a skill in and of itself. I mean, to be able to provide quality feedback to somebody, and this is really partially what this whole subject is about. How do you actually provide that quality feedback? So we've talked about listening skills last week. We talked about, I guess, a few other things as well. We've talked about assertion skills as well, only very, very briefly. But what are some ways of providing some quality feedback that you've discovered in the past, Alyssa, that seem to really work well for you?
I think, and we, obviously we were talking about this previously, but just the importance of, understanding that when you give feedback to adults, they're a little bit different in terms of how they take on board that feedback. So, we always make sure that we provide something positive, something negative, and something positive, which is what we call the good old feedback sandwich. It's good to address positive things, but it's also important to make sure you really address the areas for development in there as well. So you might want to start off with something positive, then move to something negative, and then finish it up with something positive, because adults don't really enjoy hearing something negative to start with, because it does put them off foot. So it's hard to kind of regain that rapport with them. their mind kind of starts to wander, it starts to turn negative. But if we introduce the feedback, you know, after a positive comment, it settles them a little bit better. So it's easier to get a bit of buy-in and understanding. And you know, I've always found that works to be quite well. It's an easy technique to use. You know, there are obviously other techniques out there. So Adam, I think you mentioned another technique that you use sometimes.
Yeah, I actually I like the old feedback sandwich. I think it's clever. I think it's good. It's a really simple one. It's something that people can use automatically. So we call it a sandwich because basically you're sandwiching the bit of feedback that you're providing in between two good bits of feedback. So it really softens the blow a little bit, and as you said, it allows the person to be a little bit less defensive when they're receiving the feedback information. So you kind of soften them up a little bit before you provide them a bit of info. There is a danger in using the feedback sandwich. The danger is that people are aware of it, and there is a serious danger in using it because nobody likes to feel like that they've just been softened up just to be told something that they may not want to hear.
Yeah.
So I would suggest to be very judicial when you use it. The way to use that feedback sandwich is only don't find bits of good things to wedge in around the bit of feedback just for the sake of it. If you've got some good things to say and you've got a little bit of feedback, you can use it because it's just an order of how you're going to be delivering that feedback. If you've really only got that bit of feedback to give them, and you kind of just find ways just to throw a bit of, oh, but you know, we love what you're up to. You know, if it comes across like that, then it's going to be not very authentic and it's not going to feel great. So you've got to be really careful when you use it. I guess the key in any bit of feedback, especially the good feedback, when you're providing a compliment to somebody, it's super important that you're authentic about it. If for 1 microsecond you're not authentic about any piece of, you know, a compliment or good feedback, it's a waste. Yeah. You may as well have not said it. So, you know, keep it authentic. That's the main thing. I guess the way that another way that you can go about it is what we call a 3-part assertion method. I'm actually going to write this on the screen. So a 3-part assertion message, and this is a way of providing feedback to others in the workplace. So providing feedback in the workplace. Now this can be adopted in your personal life, actually very, very, very effectively for my head. So it's just a system and a way. It's called a 3-part assertion message. Just consider it as a message that's broken down to 3 parts. So let's talk about each of those parts. First part is behavior. Second part is consequence. And the third part is feelings. So what we're actually doing is we're breaking down, and this is really more to do with when you're wanting to change somebody's behavior. So we could talk about it in the case of if somebody's being, you know, not very punctual, turning up late to work. Now if I just went to that person and said, you know, don't turn up late to work, it's not good enough, that's not a full message, and this is sort of what we want to show you, that these messages are really, really, you know, I guess what they achieve, these 3-part messages, they're really clever because they effectively aim to achieve the full spectrum of the feedback and the message. The first part is the behavior. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're addressing the behavior. That's the one that most people get. You know, hey, you're late to work. We're addressing the behavior. What's the behavior? The fact that they're late. So we're addressing that. What often gets missed out is the second 2 parts, the consequences of that behavior, and then the feelings of how it makes myself, why I'm mentioning it, how does it make me feel, for example. Going back to behavior, I guess something really important when you're talking about behavior is that you want to be very specific about it. So, you know, if I say to you, you know, when you don't, you know, when you ignore company policy like that, that's very fuzzy. It's not specific. If I sort of say, you know, when you arrive late by 10 minutes, you know, on your morning shifts on Mondays for the last 3 weeks, that's specific behavior I'm talking about now. So there's no confusion. So that's the first part. You want to identify the behavior. You want to be very specific about it. The second part is that you want to talk about the effects or the consequences. So some people use this as behaviour effects and feelings, or behaviour, feelings, effects. Consequences and effects are effectively the same thing. It's important for people to know what the consequences or the effects of their behaviour are. If we don't provide them that, we're not giving them the full context of the feedback either. So what might some of the consequences of their behaviour be in this situation? So in this particular scenario, we're talking about somebody who might be late to work by 10 minutes, the last 3 weeks on every Monday. The effects of that is that it negatively impacts on their co-workers, because their co-workers feel like they have to do more work than you do during the day. And that's fine. That's a perfect example of, that is an absolute perfect example of a consequence to something like that. It could be that, the consequences that our customers miss out on being able to get through to our service line between 9 a.m. and 9:15.
Right.
That's fine. That's a consequence. And feelings is pretty straightforward too. So feelings is really just about the person providing that message, just explaining how it makes them feel. And that really completes the full cycle of that 3-part message. And now you can do that you can flip the order, so you can actually tell the feelings before the consequences, and that's actually a common way of doing it.
Yep.
So don't do this. It makes me feel really anxious, and I feel that way because other workers are really having to do a lot more work to catch up.
Yeah.
Things like that. So.
Is this, sorry, just Adam, to interrupt, just to verify, is this kind of like, so it's probably, is this more for kind of informal type of feedback that you might give in the workplace to other employees rather than, like if you were conducting a performance appraisal, would you still use those, that BC?
This is really just a way of delivering your message. So when you're thinking about how I'm going to say it, what's the way I'm going to sort of say,
yeah,
you've been late, ain't good enough, fix your game. But, a much nicer way of doing it, because we talked about, I'm not sure if this was management or business, but we talked about assertion the other day. We talked about the submissive or passive aggressive continuum. Yeah. And we talked about really the fact that you've got two sides. You've got passive and you've got aggression. But right in the middle, you've got people that get what it is that they need, but they don't do it at the expense of other people. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to consider other people's feelings when we're trying to change their behaviour. Let's call a spade a spade. Nobody likes to be told that they're not doing something right. Nobody likes it. It's not a good feeling. Nobody wants to receive feedback in general. Even if you're at home and you leave dishes on the sink and your partner says, hey, can you stop leaving dishes on the sink? Nobody wants to be told that. But this is really just a method of putting together a message that covers all of the elements that need to be covered. So the thing is, when you talk about feelings, what you don't want to do is that you don't want to overstate, and you don't want to completely overstate the emotional response that you had, but you want to be genuine, because really the genuine disclosure of the emotion really actually underscores the importance that message has and why you're actually saying it. So the feelings and your emotions behind it are really important. And, we talk about in leadership being really open and really honest, and great leadership skill is about disclosure and telling people how you feel, but it's also being aware of how they feel and as well. So the reason why we're giving you this bit of feedback is this is the behaviour, this is the reason, this is why, this is how I feel about that behaviour, but this is why, this is the consequence of that behaviour. And it's a really clean message as well. There's a lot more to it in terms of trying to not overly judge somebody. What certain words you can use can sort of trip it up, type of thing. But yeah, I guess this, just in a very, very basic sense, this is a really good way to try and deliver some of those bits of. This is a method that you can use of delivering some of those bits of feedback that you may need to deliver within that appraisal session. Now, this might be one of your methods. You might talk about actually, working out the bits of feedback that you need to provide the employee, yeah. And you might sort of put down these 3-part messages so you know exactly how you're going to execute it. You practice that, and that's not a bad thing. So, yeah, there's a couple of little rules that you want to stick to. You want to try not to describe the behaviour judgmentally. So,
Yeah, so you don't want to put your own your personal opinions aren't going to be thrown into the mix.
yeah, well, that's right. So, here's an example. So here's an example of behaviour. You might be saying, when you overspend our clothing budget, that's some behaviour that you're talking about that you might want. It might be a partner that you're talking about. If I say it like this, when you waste our hard-earned money on unnecessary clothing.
Yeah. So yeah.
Now I am throwing all of these judgmental words right in your face when I'm describing the behaviour. It is a very, very bad way to do it, because instantly you're going to get the person upset and offside. Because if I'm telling you now that you're wasting our hard-earned money on unnecessary clothing, when really the issue is that we've gone over our budget this month, stick to the, don't throw in, overly judgmental words in there. Keep the profanities out of there as well.
Yeah.
And also keep out absolutes. So when I say an absolute, don't use words like never and always. When you're always late, when you never answer the phone to greet a customer with a positive tone, don't use these absolutes because it also boxes somebody into a corner as well. So you want to really try and be as gentle with this process as you can. Sometimes we have to say the hard message, So an example is, Alyssa, when you use my car and don't refill the fuel tank, I feel unfairly treated because I have to pay more money for gasoline than you do. There's a really good example of a message. Now, Alyssa, you don't borrow my car, which is good.
That's it.
And I don't use gasoline either. I've got an LPG tank in my car, so that's good. But yeah, anyway, so it's just about being really delicate with the message, making sure that you cover everything and that you're considering the feelings of the other person, whilst at the same time making sure that you're engaging and providing the feedback and attempting to change and alter the behaviour that you need to be altered, which is part of why we're running these sessions. And this is how to start getting into the art and practice of being assertive or being constructive, is what we talked about it the other night. So yeah,
that's good. It's a nice little that's a nice little way to deliver feedback. It was good.
Yep. So BCF or behaviour, feelings and effects or consequences, either way. It's just a good way to deliver those messages, especially when they're not easy ones to deliver.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. All right. Well, shall we kick on to the next question, Adam?
Let's do it.
All right. Beautiful. Okay. So I think, just as I can see on your screen there, I think it says, what processes do you use to ensure that the development plan is a living and breathing document that employees use to help improve performance? Okay, so I'm assuming that the development plan is the plan that you've come to once you've gone through your performance appraisal process?
Yep, it's one of your outcomes that you're going to identify in the previous question for us. So you're going to tell us that, yes, one of the things, as you mentioned, is a plan of attack. It's a development plan. This is what's going to happen next, because, we talk about innovation in business, that business are constantly needing to innovate. And I think it's the same with, with employees. The moment that you feel that, they're fine, they're happy, everything's good, is when things may go wrong. You always want to make sure that you're looking to help and assist your employees in growing and getting better and getting more skills and learning more and developing their own skill sets. So it's really important that you have a development plan, as small as it may be. Some may not be very, very complex, or there may not be a lot on them. And depending on who the person is, they may not be overly ambitious as well. But knowing that your employer cares enough about you to want to see you improve your skills is almost just as good as anything anyway. So sometimes there might only just be one or two little things anyway. That's fine. So what we're talking about here is, how do you make sure that this plan that you're going to leave with, and we know that these performance appraisals, because they are formal, some companies do them every 6 months, they're the good ones. Most companies do it once a year, and it's always okay, we've got to get these done. We've got to get them done. So the question here is, how do we make sure this document that we've agreed to and dealt with in our yearly catch-up session, we're saying, how is it a living, breathing
Document, yeah.
document? Well, how do you describe living and breathing?
Yeah, I think it's like, how do you make sure that the document is alive? Like, I think that it's a good, like, theoretically having a development plan is great when it's on paper, but if it's not being referred to, or it's not being used or followed, it essentially is a dead document. What you want to do is, we want to make sure that it is a live document, that it's alive, that it's doing something, you know, that I guess it is valuable in the workplace. So essentially, a development plan might be, as long as, I believe that when we talk about living and breathing, we're talking about it constantly being used and referred to in the workplace. So if, for example, in the first year you did a performance appraisal and you came to a development plan and there was a 6-month and a 12-month goal, a series of goals on it, that would therefore then be addressed 12 months later, or be addressed 6 months later. You know, if there's areas in your development plan about developing or moving through the organisation in terms of perhaps building or, you know, growing in terms of your position, that this development plan is therefore used in succession planning within an organisation. So rather than it just be a document that sits in a filing cabinet somewhere, that it's actually got life to it, that it's being used in various parts of the organisation to really do what it's meant to do, which is provide you with the development opportunities that you want. I know I've worked for some organisations where you just do appraisals because it's part of the process, you know, and they just get done because they have to be done. But they are such valuable documents, and a good development plan is so valuable to growth and development for a team member. And, you know, they should continue to move and grow and be reviewed throughout the course of that 12 months. So that's what my version of living and breathing is.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, I think you've definitely nailed half of it from what I can see. You know, I look at it like it's a goal, and what do we know about goals? That every goal, we need to break it down in small little chunks. So in order to make this a living, breathing thing, and not just something that we wrote down together and we wrote on a piece of paper and threw in the filing cabinet and nobody ever spoke about until we came back in a year's time, one way we can do that is to actually start to detail a bit of an action plan. So, okay, here is our development plan, so what we're trying to achieve. Let's come up with a list of some actions now that we can actually do. So now that what's happening is that the actual document, this plan, is actually alive. There are things happening, there are actions that are associated with that. And as a manager, what I would try and do is I would be wanting to keep a check on those action items to make sure that they've been actioned. But I also might just engage in a bit of informal catch up with my employee and say, hey, how's it all going? How are you going with some of those actions that we talked about? How's the development going? Have you tried that new technique that we talked about? How did that go? Fantastic. Because what it might be is that you just may need to improve some skills, because your development plan may be, I want to become a team leader, and your manager might identify that you're missing a couple of bits of, there might be a few different areas that you need to work on in terms of do that. It might be your communication. It might be the way that you interact with your other staff members. There might be some little things like that. Now, sometimes the actions aren't always loud and clear. Like usually with a goal, we're trying to make it very, very specific and so forth, smart goals especially. But with these ones, it's not always, because the development plan might be to focus on a particular skill, which is not easy to quantify, if you like. So I guess for me, regularly checking in with that person, continuing that conversation in an informal sense on a regular basis is really important, and not just leaving it for that once a year sort of catch up. It doesn't have to be every day, but as long as it's regular, then for me that's incredibly important. And yeah, the obvious ones where it gets reviewed again at the next appraisal, things like that. Anything else you'd like to add to this one?
No, I mean I'm in big agreement with you. I mean, I think it's really important that you know, if you commit to a development plan, there's so much, it holds so much importance for the person that you've created it for. So really try and get as involved and as you can in you know, reviewing where they're at. You know, you've set it out, so, you know, honour the team member by, you know, following through with them. And, you know, I love the idea of having regular catch-ups with somebody when it comes to the development plan, getting an idea as to how they're feeling, where they're at with it. You know, maybe it might mean that perhaps it needs to change, goals might need to change, you know, and then working through that as part of your development plan. So I definitely think that is really important to constantly follow up, and don't let it just hide away in a filing cabinet somewhere. Keep it alive.
You know, something that, you know, especially if you're working in a place like a call center and you've got a team leader, these sort of environments that typically have a really high turnover rate. You might have a manager, and each year you've got a different person. So for me, one of the really important things to ensure that this, as leaders in our field that we want to do, is that we want to make sure that we transition ourselves, if we are leaving the business, that we make sure, not even leaving, if we're changing our roles within the business or new people come into the fold, that we get them up to speed with these plans. So we share that information, you know, with others in the business that may be requiring that. I mean, if you get a new person that comes on board, you think, well, all of that 6 months of trying to, you know, improve my skills feels like it's been for nothing, because now I've got a new leader, team leader, and they don't know what my plan was, and they don't know what I'm trying to achieve, and I feel like I'm starting again. That does happen very, very regularly. So, you know, that transition is uber important. It's actually not something that's mentioned in the material, but if you mention, I'll be really happy. So in one way to keep this a living, breathing thing, so this plan, yes, it's a piece of paper, but it's really, what we're talking about is the development of our staff here. In order to keep that alive, we've got to make sure that we transition when roles change as well in the business. It's important. And share that information. The next question, should we go to the next one?
Let's pump on through. Adam?
What was that word?
I said let's pump on through.
Sounds good.
I was thinking of tomato sauce when I said that.
Oh, yeah?
I don't know.
Good.
I have absolutely no idea why. Anyway.
Not sure either. Not sure either. Okay, cool. So question here, what are some common information sources regarding staff development processes? So when we're talking about sources, we're talking about the place. Where did it come from? So where are the places regarding staffing development? Where are we going to find, so really what the question is, where are we going to find information regarding staffing development?
Yeah.
Yeah,
so if you're essentially looking for, as Adam has just mentioned, and as you've mentioned, Adam, you know, if you wanted to find out more information about any processes that were internally happening in terms of staff development, I mean, who could you go to within an organisation? Is there any documentation that you might be able to access? Or is there any, I guess, anybody you could consult with? Is there any type of specific elements of training that gets offered within the organisation? All of those types of things I would kind of like include there.
Yep. You know, really, I mean, look at it from both angles. So if I'm wanting to find information regarding some of the processes, who might I speak to? And in itself is really the answer, because it's really about chatting to others, and obviously the obvious one is that your human resource department, usually the one that harbour a lot of a lot of the processes, and they're the ones that really keep all of the information on student employee development and progress and things like that. So it's pretty sort of straightforward, that one. Have a look at the learning material. You know, the human resources are really the main sort of areas, or that would be the source of information. But also it might be your team leader, it might be your coach, your mentor, it might be through having a conversation with somebody, it might be through
industry, a network of some kind as well, the
actual development plan itself. So that is a source of information regarding your own development. So sometimes those development plans talk about how you're going to go about doing it. So, yep, sounds good.
Lovely. All right, so shall we just kick on
Next
to
one.
the next question? Let's have a look at here. Okay.
Okay, so this question is, sorry, I forgot that we're looking at my screen tonight.
Describe,
Okay, just,
describe the succession planning strategies currently used within your organisation.
okay, it's really interesting. I didn't even realise this question was coming out because I just talked about succession planning as a form and methodology of effectively keeping that development alive and breathing document. Yeah, so how do you want the guys to answer this one? Because
Okay.
yeah,
So look, I mean, in terms of succession planning, I guess I'm just trying to think of a good example, but in terms of succession planning strategies, they might not always be called succession planning strategies. I've worked with a couple of organisations that have what they call pathway strategies. So what they
yep,
do is, although it's not called a succession plan itself, it is definitely a succession planning strategy. So it's a series of pathways. So what they do is they might start with somebody, you know, who is at a line level, and then they will provide them with educational opportunities around that particular level, and once they've finished that, they'll move on to the next pathway, which might be at a team leader level, and then they'll go through the strategies around that they require for that particular level, and then they'll move up to the next pathway and then the next pathway. So it's kind of like a pathway that kind of elevates their progress through the organisation. It is more focused around training programs themselves, which I think is also a good succession planning. But there's a flow, or there's a like, in order to get to the next step, you have to complete step one. So you can't go straight on to step two. So you've got to do step one and then move to step two, step three, and step four. So it is kind of like that series of successions in a row rather than jumping straight up. That's one that I've used, or that I've been exposed to quite a lot, like, so a pathways type of succession planning.
okay.
Yeah.
The way that I've always been exposed to the word succession planning in business is actually, funnily enough, one of the companies I used to work for used to call it the hit by a bus plan. And what they mean is that if one member of their team is hit by a bus, what does that mean for the business? You know, so the point is, sometimes in business, some 1, 2, 3, 4 small amounts, one person might have a dangerous amount of information or knowledge about the machinations and operations of the business. And if that person was to be hit by a bus, which obviously we never want to see anything like that happening, but we just talk about it from the perspective as a worst case scenario. This person gets hit by a bus tomorrow. What's the state of our business? You know, what's the impact on the business? It's pretty bad. So what business is trying to do is just account for that. And a lot of the ways, I guess, that's done is through effectively information sharing. So in any given role, you look at, you know, what the functions of your role are, what the knowledge, the internal knowledge that you have in that role is, and what you want to try and do is you want to try and share that as much as you can with at least one other person. Now, not everything can be done, but you want to at least cover as many different things as you can. And one of the other ways that companies do it is that, and this is probably the most common way, is that they document anything of importance. So everything is documented on like a shared drive or a shared network. If I'm sick, if I'm hit by a car and I'm in a hospital for the next 3 months, then somebody else can pick up and have a look at the process document that I wrote to say, this is how I process invoices. So somebody can go in tomorrow and look at that document.
Adam, you might have to mute everybody and then...
Yeah, I'm trying to, sorry. I can't, it's not letting me do that. Can you do it at your end? I can't do it at my end for some reason.
Hold on a second. Can you hear me?
Yeah, no, you're going to have to mute individually, so I can't do it because you're the organiser.
Okay.
Okay, can you?
Yes.
Stevens, Mike, thank you.
All good.
Okay, so I'm confused as to where I was.
That was
So yeah, so really one of the most common ways is that they document things and they have things in shared folders so that procedures, policies are there, they're documented, they're on paper. So this is a succession planning strategy really, because what it says is that if I'm unable to continue, if I tell you tomorrow that I've got a new job, I'm flying to France tomorrow, then you're not going to be stuck thinking, wow, nobody else can do this job. You're the only person that knows that information. You're the only one that does. So I guess what we're talking about is, sharing information and documenting things. It's really important to document things.
And it's
How
also,
else would you tackle this one? Sorry, Lisa. Yeah.
yeah, and it's also a really big part of what we've been talking about in terms of, performance appraisals and development plans as well. I mean, a performance appraisal is a great opportunity to discuss with a team member whether or not they are interested in succession or being a part of succession planning strategy. A lot of people out there might, at the performance appraisal stage might be just happy with where they are. So it gives you a great opportunity to kind of follow through on that process. So, you've got your performance appraisal that might reveal, different needs from a particular employee. Then you can obviously put in place your development plan, which includes what you've suggested there is involving them in that succession planning, so that in case somebody does actually get hit by a bus, there's somebody that can possibly step in there and perform the task who want to actually perform those tasks as well.
But I can't remember what you mentioned. You talked about something, pathways, pathing, something earlier.
Yeah, so Pathways is an accompaniment to that succession planning. So what they'll do is a lot of organisations will run different levels of programs. So maybe like a Certificate 3 or a Certificate 4 or a diploma or an advanced diploma or right through to a bachelor. So as part of their succession planning, as well as a retention strategy too, it's progress. It's giving people the actual qualification that qualifies them essentially for that role, but also coupled with, the succession planning of getting them exposure in the experience of the organisation too.
That's really good, yeah. One of our students mentioned providing mentoring program, which is absolutely spot on. So effectively what you want to try and do is groom people to be able to take over certain roles if needed. It's a good opportunity also just to, as you said, keep them motivated, keep them feeling like their sense of worth is there, that they're important. One of the most important things that workers need to feel is that they're valued and that there's a sense of worth about what they do in the organisation. And if someone, I guess by giving somebody additional responsibilities and giving somebody a chance to try something new and engage in a new area and be available to be able to develop their skills, and then we talk about succession planning, so grooming somebody for a role, that's one of the best ways you can keep somebody engaged and motivated in an organisation.
And as you mentioned, Adam, you don't want people to, people have a lot of knowledge, and you don't want them to leave your organisation either. You want to be able to constantly engage them and constantly grow and develop them. So that is really important in recognising and valuing your employees as well.
Some businesses don't require a lot of information. What's a good example? Hard to say. Hard to come up with an example on the fly. But some companies, to be management, to work in the higher levels, the middle management, the higher levels of business, you just have to be there for 5 years, because without knowing the ins and outs of, there's so many variables and parts to it, and the programs that they use and the way they interact, and there's so many different scenarios that unless you've been there for 5 years, you will not have seen every single scenario. There are some things that you just can only enter those sort of roles if you've had a certain amount of period or time in the business. And therefore, these sorts of things are incredibly important for businesses to make sure that they're grooming, to make sure they've got their succession plans in place, to make sure that they're effectively doing one of the strategies that the students can use here. I'm kind of giving them the answers, that's okay, but one of the strategies that students might want to use is to do an analysis of a capabilities analysis. Determine what are our capabilities here. So have a look at all of our staff members, work out where all of the skills are, so that we know what our organisation is capable of, and we know who we can start grooming for different roles and who we can upskill in different areas. And it's really important. One of the strategies you might want to be using is to do an assessment and analysis of the capabilities of your staff members. So I think you guys use that one as well. So yeah, just depending on the business, it can be highly important. Some businesses like to do the other way, so they like to bring people in that are from outside or from other industries because they have different thought processes, different sort of approach. But that's not the way that some, I guess most businesses require a whole lot of information, especially when you're in those middle management roles where you're leading teams and you're going to get questions from other workers about what should I say to this customer, what should I do in this situation, how should I handle that person. Unfortunately, without a whole lot of experience, it's really hard to answer some of those things. So, as you mentioned, it's really important that businesses keep on to their staff so that they can, fill those roles and so that they keep that knowledge in the business, and not leaving the business.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do we have any questions, I guess, from the students that are in the live feed today? Anyone want to ask any questions in reference to the questions that we've gone through today? Only 4 questions today. I will be uploading the video by the end of the week in relation to the very last learning activity. We just had a few questions about that from students, so we thought we'd just clear up a few things before we present back to you what we're looking for you to provide in that. So if anybody's up to that and a bit confused, just hang in there a day or two. Any questions from our students in the live feed? Okay.
All right, well, Adam, I might actually stop the recording, so if anybody wants to ask a question, they can. So I'm just going to stop the recording now.